Good afternoon. I'd like to take the next few minutes to tell you a little bit more about the next generation of aviation professional initiatives of ICAO. Perhaps it's fitting that as we get closer to the end of the assembly, we look to the future and we talk about the people who will manage the system. If you're a parent, as I am, you will want to put in place all the conditions necessary for success for your children. And as you hand over whatever part of the air transportation system you deal with, you will want them to make the air transportation system their own with their unique abilities, insights, digital expertise, and commitment. Nancy Graham in a presentation last Friday reiterated that aviation is one of the safest modes of transport. Such an achievement depends on the people who manage, maintain, and support it. Several factors impact the ushering of the next generation of aviation professionals. The baby boomers are retiring, and the digital generation, the millennials, is poised to enter the workforce. The industry in certain regions is growing very rapidly, and training capacity has not kept up. For states, organizations, and individuals, aviation training is costly. Once this investment is made, certain conditions have to be in place to retain aviation professionals. When they are not, they move on to better opportunities. Several industry sectors, including aviation, are vying for a limited pool of human resource. Finally, the way we fly airplanes, control them, maintain them, is changing as new and emerging technologies get integrated. In her presentation last week, Narges Tessier provided some interesting numbers about potential shortages of licensed personnel. Some preliminary estimates indicate that in the next 20 years, the aviation community will need approximately 330,000 new pilots, 450,000 new maintenance personnel, and over 70,000 air traffic controllers. Again, these are preliminary numbers. In May 2009, we asked representatives from the industry, from training and education providers and regulatory bodies to come together, and we asked them to brainstorm on two main questions. One, what is constraining the recruitment, retention, and training and education of aviation professionals? And two, what global initiatives can we take as a community to respond to these constraints? At the end of this meeting, the NGAP task force was established and became a driving force behind the first NGAP symposium that we held in March this year. The event brought together 403 participants, and what we're very pleased about is that it included over 80 aviation students in the symposium itself. And they actively participated and presented their concerns of their generation. The outcomes of the symposium were presented at the high-level safety conference and in this assembly. Let me focus on a few of these outcomes. One of them was that the international community has a collective responsibility to attract and retain the best and the brightest students. It also has to ensure that they have access to quality and affordable aviation education and training. Another important point is that we need reliable data about training needs and training capacity for the short, the medium, and the long term. Another point is that our regulatory frameworks should enable and support modern learning technologies. Think competency-based training. And if we want to foster free flow of professionals, there's a need to define competencies for all aviation activities that affect safety. And a final point, which is a question really. When ICAO wants to speak to pilots, it talks to FALPA. When it wants to speak to controllers, it speaks to FATCA. To airlines, it speaks to IATA. How do we reach and engage the aviation training and education community as a whole? Who do we speak to? Question for you. Following the symposium, the NGAP task force had its second meeting. And during this meeting, we started to translate these outcomes of the symposium into a work program for the task force. This is what we are focusing on for the time being in the task force, recognizing that the scope of disciplines in which aviation professionals have to practice is wide and far-reaching. So we are dealing with flight crew, air traffic management professionals, maintenance personnel. We are dealing with accreditation of university degree granting programs and outreach. This is a very quick summary of the work plan of the task force as it relates to flight crew. The task force will look at instructor evaluator competencies, and it will really review the work that the IATA Training and Qualification Initiative has undertaken. It will then focus on the competencies for pilot in command, and it will also look at inspectors. In the air traffic management professionals domain, we will look at two distinct disciplines, the air traffic controllers and the air traffic safety electronics personnel, the ATSEPs. The plan is to identify the competencies for these two disciplines for the third meeting of the NGAP task force, which will be held in February next year. Another important item that is under consideration in the task force is related to accreditation. And when we speak of accreditation, we mean accreditation of university degree granting aviation programs. This group is presently focusing on whether it is feasible and whether there is value added for such an accreditation scheme. And we are planning to discuss this issue a little bit further in an event in the short term. Aircraft maintenance personnel. Thanks to the IATA Training and Qualification Initiative, work on the development of competencies for aircraft maintenance personnel has progressed very rapidly and very extensively. Some substantive guidance material was developed for inclusion in the PANS training document, and this has now been sent to the states for their review. So stand by. There has also been an important development in ICAO, and that is the adoption of the ICAO Civil Aviation Training Policy. This policy will impact how the ICAO name and logo are used in relation to training activities. An important component of this policy will be an endorsement mechanism, and this is under development. Finally, and definitely not least, the NGAP task force has established a subgroup to address outreach. For us in ICAO, this is very exciting and it's new territory. Here's what we're planning. A website, which should go online in February next year. A series of regional conferences where we hope to talk to aviation students and also to industry regulatory bodies in those regions. So far, we have 6 regional conferences tentatively scheduled for next year. We are also working on reaching kids in secondary school because that's when they need to get hooked on aviation. We have what we call an International Civil Aviation Day. It is the 7th of December every year. And in 2001, International Civil Aviation Day will be dedicated to the next generation of aviation professionals. And finally, we hope to bring all of you who are passionate about this issue in Montreal, or to Montreal, when we will be conducting our second NGAP symposium. Let me close with the following thoughts. ICAO has initiated work to develop policies to ensure that there are enough competent and qualified personnel available for the air transportation system of the future. The industry is emerging from a difficult economic context and some changing demographics. New technologies with far-reaching potential will intensify the human resource challenges that we face. As a community, it becomes urgent that we consider the availability of competent human resources as a key strategic issue, and ICAO is committed to this. Thank you.